Welcome, everyone, to episode 10 of the Uncharted 80s podcast. And after 10 episodes, I'm still here with my good buddy Noel. Welcome, Noel.
I'm still here too.
Excellent. So we're at our 10th episode. And just for those that are listening for the first time, our podcast shines a light on the bands from the 80s that have perhaps been forgotten or overlooked or just haven't had the profile that we believe they should. And Noel, if you remember, for our 10th episode, when we started the concept of the podcast, we were sort of strolling along the promenade or the beach close to where you live in Malaga.
In Malaga, yeah.
And just where we were thinking about how could we do this podcast and who would we want on it. And we had this massive list of bands that we wanted, which we've still got, obviously. But one of the bands that we really wanted was, of course, today's band, which is
TV21.
TV21.
We were both like, as soon as we said we're talking about the concept, we were like, TV21, that's it. This is the band we both love this band. So It's great to go to do this today.
And do you know what? We've sort of loved them from pretty much the early 80s when they were around, right up to like today. I have never wavered in my support for this band at any stage.
It's true. I mean, there's some bands over the years you kind of drift away from playing their music, but I still come back and play their stuff, and their album A Thin Red Line is great album. I still play it all the time,
Yeah, me too. So this is a band that we've sort of both love and we both know. We've both got a good knowledge of and background. And of course, today, which is a joy for us, we're also going to be interviewing Norman Roger from TV21. So that's coming up shortly. But let's do a bit of a biography of the band.
I'll start if you like.
Yeah, great.
So they're a band from, based in Edinburgh, and they, in a nutshell, they had a series of impressive singles, the album that I mentioned, and actually they got great support from John Peel. Peel loved them. But what happened was that, like so many bands that we talked to, the record company kind of messed them around and weren't happy and tried to change them and ended up basically not giving them support they should have done and eventually just dropping them. And it was pretty sad. But they actually managed to get support of the Rolling Stones Scottish tour. So I mean that would have been a massive tour to be supporting on. So that's kind of in a nutshell what went on with TV21.
Was that their peak, do you think?
It was their peak. I'll tell you why it was their peak, because having been sort of messed around by the record company and not getting any sort of more opportunities after that, immediately on the last date of that tour, they agreed backstage to split. So, they reached the absolute pinnacle. They'd been on the front cover of Melody Maker just prior to that. So really at the top of the game, but the record company just, really dropped the ball and dropped them. And it was really sad that they decided to, call it a day.
I don't think we've had one episode so far where there hasn't been some form of, record company dispute or interference or disagreement with those bands. And maybe that's why some of them perhaps haven't lasted, or maybe it's something completely different. But there's definitely a real trend there.
Absolutely. I mean, the early stuff they did was phenomenal. The first single that caught my ear and caught my attention was Snakes and Ladders. It had almost like an early Adam and the Ant kind of drum beat on it, and it was great. I love that. And that's really got me into the band.
We're not happy and we're not sad. We're not crazy, but we must be mad. There's snakes at the bottom, snakes at the top, and the ladders all shake and the ladders all rock. We're not happy and we're not sad. We're not crazy, but we must be mad. There's snakes at the bottom, snakes at the top, and the ladders all shake and the ladders all rock. We're not happy and we're not sad. We're not crazy, but we must be mad. There's snakes at the bottom, snakes at the top, and the ladders all shake and the ladders all rock. And everywhere I look, I see 1,000 other fools like me, all crouched down on bended knee, with their eyes shut tight but their hands are free. And everyone is fighting blind, scratching, biting, wasting time, up to the bottom and down to the top, where snakes and ladders never stop. And no one asks the question why. We exist by getting by, and we keep playing this crazy game where snakes and ladders are all the same.
B-side of Snakes and Ladders was a song called Artistic License, sort of
That's
quite
it.
different. I don't know
Yeah.
if you know, did you see that was produced, although Ian Brody did the A-side, the B-side was produced by James Honeyman Scott and Martin Chambers, and they were both the guitarist and the drummer from The Pretenders.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Because also I think Troy Tate was involved at some point, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was on their first Power Beat single, so
Yeah, that's
Ambition and
right.
Playing with Fire.
Yeah.
Troy Tate from the Teardrop Explodes produced that.
They gave away a free single with it as well, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, they did actually. That was fantastic. Real good intro.
Yeah. So who were they then? Who was the band?
So the band was Norman Roger on vocals and guitar, Ali Palmer on guitar, Neil Baldwin on bass. The initial drummer was Colin McLean. He was replaced by Ali Patterson of the Rezillos, and then later Dave Hampton joined on horns. But Norman and Ali Palmer had actually grown up together and spent their teenage years in different bands, where they grew up in Prestwick in South Ayrshire in Scotland. And Ayrshire, of course, where Mike Scott of the Waterboys comes from. So there was a connection there as well.
If I talk to people about it, they go TV21. What a funny name. And where does that come from then?
Well, TV21 actually was a 1960s comic, and it was inspired in Britain. There was a really popular set of TV sort of cartoon, puppet shows, really, I suppose they were, by Jerry Anderson, who had a company called TV21, and they were great. As a kid, I used to watch. There was Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, Joe Stingray, yeah, just
Stingray.
loads of these great things that were, of their era, but really iconic of the time. I mentioned Ali Patterson and the Rezillos, and the Rezillos used to play a live version of the Thunderbirds theme, actually. So there's a connection there as well.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, so Ali and Norman were in college actually in Lancashire in '79, and they met Neil Baldwin and Colin McLean, and that's when they formed the group. Because Colin was good mates with Mike Scott, who I mentioned. Obviously, I'm a massive Waterboys fan.
Oh, you're a huge Waterboys fan.
And, yeah, Colin was a good friend of Mike, and he'd actually moved up to Edinburgh. There was a big, growing and exciting new music scene there, and TV21 decided to follow Mike and base themselves there. So they were kind of based out of Edinburgh.
So what was the sort of, from a sort of record point of view, what was the releases?
Well, so what they did was in 1980, while they were in Edinburgh, they formed their own label, Power Beat label, it was called, and they released a single which was called Ambition. And
Great
the
song.
B-side, yeah, it's very good. And the B-side was also great, called Shattered by It All.
Yeah, another great
And
song. I might actually be saying great song after every time you mention a track because I don't think there's any song that I don't
No,
like.
I
So
think we all like them. Yeah, every
I
song they've
won't
done,
say that
we're
anymore.
big fans. Yeah. But Norman and Neil, right? I like this is called. They hitchhiked all the way down to London with a bag full of records to Radio 1 and dropped off the single, and it paid off because a couple of days later, the B-side "Shattered by It All" got played on Radio 1.
Well, I
So
think it's interesting because in those days, that almost was the way things were done, wasn't it? You used to go and drop records off. Not that I did it, but people used to go and drop records off at Radio 1, and that's how they got the records played on the radio. Yeah, that was
yeah,
the
we heard the same from the Darling Buds, didn't we?
yeah,
They just
yeah.
rocked up and chanced their arm, and it seemed to be a good move.
Doesn't feel like that's the way that things happen these days, does it?
No, it seems to
Of
be
its
all kind
time,
of
maybe.
digital recording, and I don't know,
Mm.
I don't know how much vinyl's around these days, but so yeah, so that was the original sort of that was 1980. In 1981, Colin left, and the Rezillos drummer I mentioned, Ali Patterson, joined, but so did Dave Hampton, who also joined on horns. And at that point, they did a one-off record deal with Demon Records, with another great song, "On the Run."
Took a chance. I ran the race. Straight in the sights of your start and gun. Out on a limb. There's no going back. I threw the dice, now I've got to run. I looked at you, a lot like me. Run in the room and you find your name. They got my place, they got my lies. One day you're free, the next in chains. Who's gonna get me first? Who's gonna get me first? Who's gonna get me first? Them or you?
They've done sort of multiple versions of that, haven't they?
They have actually, yeah.
Yeah, I have seen that. And actually, they had a particularly classy B-side. That was End of a Dream, which is probably in my top 5 songs of theirs.
Yeah, it's a great B-side actually. That on the Demon
Whatever
record.
happened to great B-sides? It's funny, isn't it? Because also a lot of bands of that time used to have really strong B-sides that were almost these days would probably be considered to be A-sides. And I know people used to have double A-sides and so on, but all of the B-sides that you see, they're all really strong songs.
They are. I mean, like thinking back to the Faith Brothers, "Country the Blind" was the first single, but one of the B-sides on a double single was "Eventide," the kind of full band version. And "Eventide," actually, they wanted as the main single, but they even put it on the B-side anyway. So that itself would have stood on its own as a single. So
Yeah.
as you say, some of these B-sides are so strong, and TV21 are absolutely no exception to that.
Well, Screen 3 was saying the same thing, weren't they? That they switched one of their songs, which was they wanted to be the A-side, was ended up as the B-side. And if you think
That's
about,
right, yeah.
I don't know, like the Jam, I suppose, are probably one of the bands that had really strong B-sides. Butterfly Collector is one that springs immediately to my mind.
Yeah.
But they're the sort of, they really had strong B-sides.
They really did, yeah. I mean, it was both sides of the record of the Jam were like you couldn't wait to play them both when you got them. It's really good stuff. Yeah. So
Okay.
we've mentioned Snakes and Ladders, but what I didn't know until I did a bit of research here was that, and obviously it had hits written all over it, clearly as we know. By that point, they were signed by Deram Records, who were basically the relationship was becoming increasingly unstable, should we say. The label thought the band's material wasn't commercial enough, and they delayed the release of Snakes and Ladders. Now, get this right. So they've got a tour lined up. They were touring to promote the single, but the label refused to put the single out because they didn't like the idea of it. So they just went out with nothing to promote. It was
Crazy.
complete waste.
Crazy.
Complete waste. Craziness. And then the album, A Thin Red Line, we talked about, fantastic album.
Mhm.
For the label, they thought the songs weren't poppy enough, but the band, they felt their trademark raw sound had been compromised too much in the studio. So Thin Red Line was produced by Ian Brody, who we know, of course, from the Lightning Seeds.
Yeah.
And until I read the notes on this recently, I assumed that they were very happy with it, because as we are, as fans listening to the album, we love it. But actually, they weren't very happy with it, and they felt that it kind of outproduced sort of their raw sound. So
Yeah, I'd be
was
interested
a
to
surprise,
see
yeah.
what Norman says about that. I can see what they mean on some of the songs. You get a
Yeah.
feeling that when you hear them live or heard some of their earlier demos, you feel that some of it is, I don't know whether you call it overproduced, but certainly some of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all I know is that I really like it, and there's, I mean,
me too.
for example, as you know, one of the absolute cracking songs on there is "An Ideal Way of Life."
The voice of rhythm in the air, she commands, we all obey. The weak of what the weak can hear, and all the girls are out to play. But you despise and criticize them and their petty hates. What you see's not what you wanted, someone isn't playing. And as the numbers rise and fall, addiction to the colored flows. Is this your ideal way of life? Is this your ideal way of life? You say yes when they say no, when they say stop when you say go. You contradict to idealize.
That was the band's choice to promote the album. However, the label had other thoughts and decided to put out a slightly less commercial song called "Something's Wrong."
And I don't understand you. Your logic defies any sense. Strange to read in darkness and shade your eyes in day. You watch the seeds we planted and pray for rain to come, but stamp on them with any sign of promise to make it on their own. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. Something's wrong when you think that bad is good. Think that bad is good.
On the album, actually had Pete Wiley from Wah singing and credited on it.
I wonder if you can hear his voice.
I don't know.
He's got
I
quite
don't
a
know.
distinctive voice, isn't he?
He does. He does.
Hmm. Well, I think they did another mix actually of that. So
Oh, right.
I think that the guy that we spoke to, Roger Bachirian, I think
Right.
he'd done a mix of it that they were, perhaps weren't entirely happy with. So, and actually, when you listen to that song, I've heard a few versions of it. It feels like maybe they were like on the run. They were just trying to get, maybe they were searching for a sound. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, what I do know is that, I mean, it's a good song. Everything they've done is a good song, of course. But I find it kind of ironic that the record company had an issue saying you're not commercial enough. Then they put out a song which didn't feel very commercial.
No.
So
No.
it's all very odd,
That's a bit illogical, that.
Absolutely.
'Cause, I mean, don't want it too controversial, but Ideal Way of Life is a better song than Something's Wrong, I would say, and
Oh,
would have been a
absolutely.
perfect
Yeah.
song to promote the album.
I totally agree.
Hmm.
But despite the band's disappointment, shall we say, with how they felt the album sounded compared to what they expected, although we as fans still love it. It got a glowing review in Melody Maker by one of the big music journalists at the time, Paolo Hewitt, and it was actually on the front cover of Melody Maker, as I mentioned. So
Yeah, they seem to like them. Gary Crowley was also a big fan, wasn't he?
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Gary's always had his finger on the pulse with all the sort of best upcoming music, hasn't he? So
Yeah, and he actually wrote an introduction in the liner notes for their compilation album.
interesting stuff.
What about telly then, Noel? What were they on the telly at all?
They were on TV actually. They had one appearance, and that was on a show on BBC Two called The Old Grey Whistle Test, which anybody outside the UK, that was a really big thing. It had like some really cool bands on there, and they played live, unlike Top of the Pops where they're supposed to mime it. And it was a real good insight to the band's material. And that was broadcast in December '81. And they played two songs. They played Ideal Way of Life, and they played This Is Zero, another great song. Basically, this is pretty much a story of the record label going against the band's wishes, and basically pretty much demoralised by now, and they kind of went along with the label's wishes, and the resulting single "All Joy in Hands" was miles from their natural style. The quote I saw about it from them was that it was hated by the band, slated by the press, and it didn't make the chart. So it was completely pointless.
But other than that, a great song, right?
Yeah. But yeah, then the label dropped the band, so that's kind of messed them around, not promoted them in the right way, and then they dropped them, and that's when they did the Rolling Stones tour, and basically they were hoping they might get a bit more interest from other labels, but that wasn't forthcoming. So that's when they decided to, call it a day at Edinburgh Playhouse on the last date of the tour.
Well, what a way to go out, though.
I know, yeah. I mean, they're at the top of the game, at least, if nothing else. John Peel loved them. I mentioned that before. He played every single one of their releases. He played all the tracks off their album, and he played every single and even the odd B-side. How about that?
I mean, I know John Peel keeps cropping up as a constant in all of the bands that we've talked about, but that is above and beyond, isn't it?
It is.
The one thing about the record was that On the Run, which was one of their songs, isn't even on the album.
No, that's weird, isn't it?
And yeah.
So I mean, the one of the album tracks, which is a bit more of a not quite as upbeat, but quite hypnotic and a great song, "Ticking Away," that again had Mike Scott involved. So he played piano on it actually.
Oh, okay.
The Waterboys, played the piano on that. So, but they did quite a few gigs as well. They supported the Undertones.
Well, I saw them support the Undertones. That's where Hemel Hempstead Pavilion.
Right.
That's where I sort of started my my love of the band. Yeah.
Well, I saw them. They did a 10-day tour of Poland, by the way, just to drop that in. But I saw them supporting the Jam. Now, it was at Hammersmith Palais. It was really quite interesting because Weller had got this idea of the kind of 60s, the way the 60s bands used to do this kind of review tour. So they'd have several bands on tour at the same time, and they'd have like a DJ playing the stuff in between. And the idea was that the DJ would play a song and it would fade out, and the band would come on and say hello and start to play. So there's no kind of waiting around while the band tuned up. It's literally like DJ song finish, band play, DJ song. So they had a band from Northern Ireland called Rudy was first on. I don't know if you remember them.
I
A
do.
good singer called Big Time. Then they had a very young Bananarama, and then they had TV21, and then they had the Jam. And the DJ was the lead singer of Department S, Fawn to Lose. So it was a great night. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
great.
So going back to that tour of Poland, the 10-day tour of Poland, one really interesting thing about that, apart from playing 10 days in Poland, of course, was that Gary Crowley joined them for the whole of those 10 days on the tour.
So what happened after the sad moment when they decided that to stop it all? Is it because I think from memory they did an album about 30 years or so after the first one. What happened there?
Oh, Forever 22. That's a great album. Yeah, but in between that, Norman and Ali Palmer started a band called The Collective, who became called Shame. And then Neil went off and joined the Bluebell after they'd had their big hit Young at Heart.
Oh,
Remember that one?
okay.
And then Norman played with one of my favourite bands, of course, the Waterboys, on Old Grey Whistle Test. So he played bass actually on that. And then they did some of the bits and pieces together over the years. But it was in 2005 that they reformed and they released an EP and the album you mentioned there, the Forever 22 album.
Hmm.
And they continue to play occasionally over the years as well.
They still don't seem to be that prolific.
No, I think they do stuff from time to time, a bit like the Darling Buds when we spoke to them. They'll do occasional gigs here and
Yeah,
there. It's a
okay.
similar kind of thing. You know.
Yeah.
They'll do gigs here and there. Ali Palmer is actually an award-winning newspaper arts director. And I was looking through trying to find Dave Hampton, the trumpet player. And actually I found there is a Dave Hampton who plays trumpet for the Brighton Blues Corporation, who looks suspiciously like our man. Ever since then, they've done this great album. They do stuff occasionally and, they still get together, they still play, they still love it. We can ask Norman about that as well.
Okay, why don't we do that? He can put some colour to our black and white story. So let's have a chat with him now. Welcome, Norman Roger from TV21. Welcome to episode 10 of the Uncharted 80s. It's fantastic to have you here.
Cheers.
So you played your very first gig as TV21 very soon after Neil and Colin joined. So I assume that you'd written a load of songs before when you were growing up with Ali in Prestwick.
Not really. We actually played our first gig before Colin joined.
Okay.
I think we did the first gig we did as TV21 was, if I remember rightly, was supporting Another Pretty Face in a place called Edgehill College where Neil and I were students. So we did a gig with, I think the lineup was me and Neil and Ali with a guy called Rob Tasker playing drums. Rob Tasker went on to play in a band called The Nice Men.
Oh, yeah.
They had a single out called Nuclear Summer, which was out on Demon Records. So Rob was a mate of ours in college, and he couldn't play drums. he would be the first to admit it. He just wanted to do the gig. And then we moved up to Edinburgh in September 1979, and then it was just after that Colin joined. But yeah, we had a bunch of songs from previous bands. Ali and I played in a band called the ARG, AAA-RGH, exclamation mark. As used in the Victor and other such comics when someone was killed. So we had a bunch of stuff from then. We wrote a lot of stuff over that summer before we moved to Edinburgh, and we also had songs from another band that I was involved with called the Bootlegs, which was with Mike Scott from the Waterboys now. And we did a couple of gigs the summer before that in 1978. So some of those songs that I'd written got carried over to TV21. So It's Me was one of those songs that ended up on Forever 22.
Yes. Yeah, great song.
So those early influences then, what were they for you?
I mean, I suppose pre the kind of punk era, my main bands were bands like the Faces and the Who, the Kinks, the Beatles, the Stones. And then once punk came along, it was really loved the Clash, loved the Ramones, the Rosillos, then the Jam and the Undertones. So it was kind of a mishmash of and other things like Patti Smith, Springsteen, Dylan, and it all just went into the mix.
Brilliant. I saw you support the Jam actually, Hammersmith Palais. Yeah.
Yeah, the Jam the Jam gig we did was the one that they released on vinyl. We did that. They did that six album set of each year they toured. Yeah. So it was that show. So we get a name check on that album. So I was quite chuffed with that one.
Brilliant.
And you also then, after at the beginning of those early days, you then sort of created your own record label, Powerbeat.
Yeah.
What was the sort of thinking or the process behind that?
I think we were kind of getting a bit frustrated. We'd been going for about 6 months, which in those days seemed like an eternity. So everybody else was putting things out by themselves. So we thought it was going to be easier to try and just put our own single out than it would be to try and get a deal. So we basically just scraped whatever money we could together. Ali was working at the time, so he had a bit of cash. The rest of us didn't. Colin was also working. I had some premium bonds from when I was a kid, and then one of our flatmates put up some money as well, and that was just enough. We managed to scrape together about, I think it was £800, and that covered 2 days in the studio, a little 8-track studio called Palladium, and then the rest went on, pressing and all that sort of stuff. And we basically we did it all ourselves. We went down to London to do the cut. I think if I remember rightly, I think we hitchhiked down to London with the master tapes, and then we went to Porky's Prime Cut studio in Portland Place near Regent Street in London, and then pressed it up. And then once we got the records delivered, we then spent a couple of days folding up all the sleeves that we had printed ourselves, and then literally just did all the distribution. Colin borrowed his mum's car, and he and I drove down to London and just rocked up at different places and knocked on the door and said, "Here's our single, will you play it please?" And to our surprise, we handed it in to Radio 1 on the Thursday, I believe it was. And on the Monday, it was played on, I think it was Peter Powell played Shattered by It All on the Monday morning. And John Peel played Playing with Fire the same night, so it was like, yes.
Way amazing. That's great.
When we spoke to Mick Brophy from the Cheetahs, they did something very similar. Went down to Radio 1, and he was saying that they could, in those days, you could sort of go and doorstep people and just take a box of records and just chuck them in, or pass them to the DJs and hope. And Screen 3 did the same actually as well. So
yeah, everyone did. I mean, when Another Pretty Face, when they did their first single, they did the same thing, and they just went to the BBC and happened to see John Peel in the foyer, I think, and he invited them into his studio to listen to the show and chat to them about their record and things like that. And Ali Palmer was there as well. He happened to be down there with them, and they all got invited in, so they sat and watched the John Peel show in the studio as it happened.
Oh wow, that's amazing. That's great. What a story.
Because he really loved you, didn't he? Or he seemed to really like TV21.
He did. He was really supportive. It was great. Especially the early days, he was absolutely essential to getting us going. And when the album eventually came out, he played the whole of the first side in a winner, which is like, whoa, it was great. But those sessions, you can probably come on to them later, but they were pivotal, I think, in getting recording contracts, getting gigs, and just starting to get a following going.
We've seen a real trend actually about the bands that we're speaking to that those John Peel sessions have been they've been pivotal for them in their sort of band careers.
Yeah. I mean, it was just kind of everyone sort of strove to get a session that was like, once you'd got your first session, you felt you were on the first step of the ladder kind of thing. We got a phone call it was John Walters just phoned us up, and Peel's producer just phoned us up in the flat one day and said, "Do you want to do a session?" And we went, yeah. And he said, "How about Monday?" And I'm like, "Oh, can I just ask the guys?" And he goes, "Do you want to do it or not?" And I was like, yeah, we want to do it, but we've got to get down from Edinburgh. And he's like, "All right." I said, "Give me 5 minutes." So it was quick rush through the living room. "Do you want to do a Peel session on Monday?" "Yeah, okay." Off we went.
That's great.
And what were they like, those Peel sessions? Were they because they always sounded really good?
They were fantastic. I mean, we were really lucky that we were kind of ready for it. I think at the time we did the first one, we were pretty well rehearsed by then. We'd playing quite a bit, and we just went down. We went down to London a day or two before the session, and we were all staying with different people and just crashing on floors. And I remember I woke up on the day of the first session with the stinking cold, and I could barely speak, and I got sort of pulled up with, what were those things called, Contact 400 or something. Completely did the trick, and I was fine by the time we got to the session. And it was great because you walked into Maida Vale, and you turned in down to the left in this big corridor, and there was the radiophonic workshop where they did all the Doctor Who stuff. And wow, so everyone was a bit starstruck about being there. And then we got in and discovered that the producer was a guy called Bob Sargent, who had done the early Beat singles.
All right.
But he wasn't actually that interested. He was a bit sort of couldn't be bothered. The guy who did the work was actually Dale Griffin, who had been the drummer of Mott the Hoople. He was the assistant producer, he was the engineer, and he was great, and he was really, really supportive. But we also took in Troy Tate with us, and Troy and Dale got on great, and they just talked us through it. And you basically had 12 hours. So the first hour or so was kind of setting up, then you had a quick break to go and get a coffee or lunch or something, and then doing sound checking the drums, whatever, and then you had to record the backing tracks live, and then you did the vocals, and then you 1 or 2 overdubs. You didn't have much time for overdubs. Take a break again around about 6, and then start mixing it, and you had to be out by midnight again. So it was great. It was really, you never saw the DJs. The only time that happened was when we did the Richard Skinner session, because for some reason Maida Vale was closed at the time, so we did the Skinner session in the BBC building on Portland Place in the basement. So he popped down to say hello, and he took us to the pub afterwards. So that was pretty cool.
That's cool. I like that. So I want to ask you a question about Dave Hampton. So you'd played with him in a short-lived college band, I understand, but you didn't realise he was actually trying to learn the trumpet until your final exam. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Dave was I think he was also in the Nice Men, which was Neil, Dave, and Rob and a couple of other guys. And I remember doing my history exam and hearing some dreadful trumpet playing, somebody trying to play Bitch by the Rolling Stones. And eventually, after we left college, Dave went down to London, and I think it was just by chance I met him in London about 6 months into TV21, and at that time everyone was getting brass sections and trumpet players, and I said, "You fancy coming up and having a go?" And he was really up for it. He wasn't doing anything, so he just came up to Edinburgh, and the rest was history, as they say.
On your CD, you talk about the sort of 4 to 5 piece shift, and about how you felt about that.
The band shifted quite a bit from the point Colin left and Ali Patterson came in, and then Dave came in shortly afterwards, and so the sound shifted quite a lot with it. And at the time, I think we were all really happy with the way the sound went. And yeah, I liked the trumpet as well. Great in the studio, but live, I think we probably needed a proper brass section rather than just one trumpet.
What about those early playing live experiences? Then, what was there sort of favourites for you in terms of playing live at all?
Yeah, I mean, to begin with, we were pretty ropey live. To start off with, we were just kind of winging it really, because the original intention for TV21 had been that a guy called Alan McConnell was going to play guitar. I don't know if you've ever heard the single by DNV called "Death in Venice." It was actually the band was originally called the Bootlegs, and that was me, Alan McConnell, Mike Scott, and another guy called Craig, who was also in Another Pretty Face for a while. And then Mike retrospectively put this single out a few years later called under the name of DNV. And Alan played guitar on that, and he was going to be the original guitarist in TV21. And then he met somebody and they got married, and that was the end of that. So I switched from playing bass to playing guitar, and so my guitar playing was pretty rudimentary. So the early gigs were pretty rough and ready till we kind of found our feet a bit. Probably the first ones that we kind of felt we were actually getting somewhere was when we played at our former college at Edge Hill, because we had a kind of ready-made audience and it was people knew us and stuff, so it went down really well. But the gigs didn't really start getting good, I think, until after Colin left. Colin, a nice guy, but his drumming was pretty erratic. And again, if you've heard the first Peel session, his drumming on Waiting for the Drop is all over the place. It's like the 16ths and the hi-hat are just so out of time. And then we brought Ali Patterson in, it was much more solid. So the first really good gigs we did were probably on the Moondogs tour. Played the Marquee with them and completely wiped them off the stage. And on the back of that, then got a residency at the Marquee that summer. And they were fantastic gigs. And
the Marquee's great, isn't it? The Marquee's a great venue, isn't it?
It was brilliant, yeah. And then a couple of the gigs we did with the Undertones were really good. The one at Hammersmith Pally was a tremendous gig. And then latterly, a few of the gigs we did in Edinburgh in the sort of late kind of 1980 into 1981, once we were sort of really starting to build up a bit of a fan base, they were great too. And then probably the best ones we did were, well, one of the best ones was actually in the Polish tour we did in Warsaw. It was just fantastic. But yeah, so we were always a bit, we didn't really play enough, I think. Probably. I think we went through a funny phase where we were spending far too much time kicking our heels waiting for the next tour or the next gigs to come up. And we should really just been gigging constantly, because we were actually getting really good, and then it got a bit erratic, and some of the gigs were great and some of them were pretty ropey.
So when you went to Poland, I think it was like a 10-day tour or something, wasn't it? Quite a big tour. That's amazing. So you must have had quite a big fan base out there.
We didn't know anybody, and no one knew us from Adam.
Oh.
Basically what happened was that some Polish guy promoter saw us at this weird gig we did in a place called Caister-on-Sea in a holiday camp in Easter 1980, I think it was. And he came backstage and introduced himself. And that was the last we heard of him for a few months. And he turned up at one of the Marquee gigs. And he said, look, we're trying to get a few British bands to go across and play in Poland. Would you be interested? And we were like, yeah, sure. And so they organised the tour. They said, oh yeah, we'll 3 bands, we're all on this one bus, we can all share gear, but we'll make sure it's all really up to scratch, all the best gear and all the rest of it. Just give us a list of what you want. So our road manager and sound engineer went out a day or two before us, and we got there and they're like, it was like playing with Woolworths amplifiers, and everything was so rickety, but it was great. I mean, a really interesting experience. It was a couple of the gigs there were just phenomenal, and then some of them were just weird. But the whole experience, we keep talking about we need to sit down, all of us around a table, and just record our recollections of that tour, because it was such a unique thing. We were the first British band to tour there, I think. A few bands had played in Warsaw, but no one had toured there since the wall went up. Quite how it ended up being us is anyone's guess. But yeah, it was wild. I mean, we played with this band called Brigada Krysis, this Polish band. We were quite kind of outspoken politically, and they would really stir the crowd up. And some people loved them, some people hated them. The singer got badly beaten up on a couple of occasions on that tour, and a few times after that. And actually, it killed him in the end. He got beaten up and got killed about 5 years ago. But when we played in Gdansk, we played in a police gymnasium, and as Brigada Krysis were playing, I was trying to do an interview with Kid Jensen over the phone. There was only, at that time, 11 phone lines out of Poland.
Wow. And
you had to pre-book a slot to get a call out of the country, and it was vetted by the security forces and stuff. But I was under a table like this trying to speak to Kid Jensen because of this racket going on in the background. The band was playing, then this riot kicked off. There was tear gas getting thrown by the police into the crowd, and it was just mayhem, and I'm trying to talk to him. I had no idea what he was saying. I was just talking absolute nonsense down the phone. So
oh, that's amazing. What a memory.
Interesting experience.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the sort of first single, On the Run? So that was seemed to be the start of a bit of success. I just wondered about, how the process of getting to that single, because On the Run, you seem to, I can't work out whether you were happy or unhappy with it, but you've clearly over the years, you've done quite a lot of versions of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We
All great, by the way. But
yeah, we did. I think that's generally everyone's favourite song, and we never felt we did it justice. The version we all liked best was the Peel session.
Took a chance, I ran the race, straight in the sights of your starting gun. Out on a limb, there's no going back. I threw the dice, now I've got to run.
Initially, we said, like, why don't you just buy the tapes of the BBC and put that out? And then the record company were going, oh no, yeah, the drumming's not very good. It's a bit sloppy here and there, but it had a great feel, and we were more interested in the feel than the production. The way it came about was that when we released Playing with Fire, a guy called Gary Crowley, who was
Gary, yeah.
Yeah, you know Gary.
Yeah,
And at the time, Gary was working as a kind of gopher, really, for a publishing company, but he also had this slot on a kids' TV show called Fun Factory on a Saturday morning, and every Saturday he would do his pick of the week sort of thing, and so he was holding up our single, and we're like, whoa, it's on the telly. On the back of that, he played it to his boss, and his boss got interested, followed us after we did the Ambition single, did a few gigs in London. He came down to see us a couple of times, and he offered us a publishing contract for a one-off single, which was On the Run and End of a Dream. So the first version was recorded in Nick Lowe's studio in Shepherd's Bush, and it was a tiny little studio. And we had, because there was so little space, we had to put the amplifiers in a cupboard in the basement. And it was amazing because we were putting all these amplifiers in, and here's like all these tapes of demos of Elvis Costello's first album and things. You think, this. But yeah, so we did the single, and we weren't, the record company wasn't very happy with it. They wanted to put End of a Dream out as the A side, release the original version of On the Run as the B side. but we convinced them to let us re-record it. So we recorded it in Sava Studios in Glasgow a couple weeks later, and that's what came out on the single. I think with hindsight, we should probably have put End of a Dream out.
Hello, stranger, remember me? I was the person you saw in your dream, or was it you that's in mine? I don't know. We should have met somewhere close, in the middle. It would have been nice. Hello, stranger, whoever you were. You look alright, but something's wrong, or is it me that's gone? I don't know. We should have stayed fast asleep. I woke up, 'cause it's over now. End of a dream. Over now. End of a dream. Hello, stranger, look at my face. Is it the one you saw so many times?
Because it's such a great
It is a
single.
great song. It is a
Yeah, it
great
really is.
song.
Yeah, really
Mm.
is.
But we were so kind of, no, John Peel likes On the Run, so that's that's what we're sticking with. So yeah, so we did the single, but we still weren't particularly happy with that, which is why we re-recorded it for Thin Red Line, and then didn't release it on there either, and then came back to it again when we did Forever 22.
Yes. Yeah. What about so how does that all then lead into the album then? The Thin Red Line?
Yeah, because I suppose on the back of the first Peel session, the On the Run single coming out, we were doing a lot of gigs down in London, and so record companies started coming along, sniffing around. I think On the Run came out something like late January, early February 81, and I think we signed the contract with Deram in March. Things didn't really go as planned from there. They signed us, and then they wanted us to go back and re-record all the original singles. Like they said, "No, let's not think about an album. Let's re-record Playing with Fire. Let's re-record Ambition, End of a Dream, because they're all hits." And we were like, "No, this is, you've seen us evolve. You've signed us at the point where we're at. That's not what we want to do." So from the word go, we were arguing with them. Then they wanted us to record Ticking Away with Eric Stewart from 10cc producing, and we were like, "No."
Lying there, watching photographs, faded photographs. Middle age, you're just middle age, but you won't admit. No, you won't admit. Hanging on to days gone by, hanging on to days gone by. And the ones you love, or you'd like to love, they all laugh at you, all just laugh at you. And the ones your age, from a distant age, they disown you now, all disown you now. Hanging on to days gone by, hanging on to days gone by. Hanging on to days gone by, hanging on to days gone by.
Much as I liked early 10cc stuff, at the time it just seemed, oh no. So it took a while. We first the first single we eventually agreed on was going to be Snakes and Ladders, which we recorded with the Pretenders, Martin Chambers and James Honeyman Scott producing.
Yes, yeah.
And that was because of the connection with our publisher, Clive Banks, because he also published them. So we spent a couple of days in London doing that. And again, the record company weren't happy with it. They felt it was just, it was too fast. It was too kind of raw, the way we recorded it. So then they brought in Ian Brodie to redo the single. But they weren't happy with Ian Brodie doing it on his own, because at that point he was a bit of an unknown. So they insisted that Alan Winstanley sit in on that. But everything had started to get out of sync by this time, because the single had been due for release in April. We then got the Undertones tour, which was meant to promote the single. The single didn't come out until the end of the Undertones tour, so we missed that boat. And then meanwhile, we were starting to record tracks for the album, but it was in between things. The company wasn't really investing in us properly. They didn't say, right, we want to, this is the track, we want 3 singles, then we're going to take a break and you can do the album. It was like 2 days here. There's a spare slot at the studio on a night shift for a couple of days then. The longest stint we got was up at Highland Studios near Inverness. I think we had about maybe 8-10 days up there doing what became the bulk of Thin Red Line. But even then, the company wasn't convinced about Ian Brodie, and they insisted that a guy called Steve Brown, who was their kind of in-house producer, sat in on it as well. So Steve, he had a pretty good pedigree, and especially when you look back, he died a couple of years ago, and I hadn't realised how much he'd done over the years, but he did stuff with the Manic Street Preachers and loads of other people. And then the whole thing with Something's Wrong coming out as a single, and they wanted Roger Basharian to produce it, and he did an edit, and we weren't happy with it, and everything just seemed to be a constant fight with the record company all the time. So yeah, I think it didn't quite go to plan.
After all going on about On the Run, they still didn't. It wasn't on that record, was it?
I think that was our own fault. That was us within the band. We recorded all the tracks that are on the album, plus On the Run, The Hidden Voice, Through Different Eyes. What else was there? It was about 3 or 4 songs extra, and we were all saying, "Oh no, On the Run's been out as a single. It was on the Peel saying we shouldn't put it out on the album." Right. And at that point, the record company was saying, "Yes, you should." And again, we should have listened and put it on, because it would have been a lot. But there's a couple of tracks like Attention Span is, it's all right, but it's not one of the best tracks on the album. And I think On the Run would have made it a much stronger album.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've had this experience before. We spoke to B Movie, B Movie, and they had exactly the same thing. The label signed them because they liked them, and then they immediately tried to change them and re-record all their old stuff. Exactly the same story. It's like self-defeating for the label. I mean, what are they trying to achieve?
I know, but when you listen to bands talking, especially from that time, it's so common. And so many bands, once they get that initial contract, they start to fragment because people are pulling you in all different directions. And we were really focused up to the point we had the contract. We knew where we were going, how we wanted to sound, etc., etc. And then the minute you get like A&R man, a manager, a producer, blah, 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 publisher, whatever, they've all got different takes on how you should be. And it starts to really erode at you.
Oh, I get it. What a shame.
Because we thought like Tomorrow or Ideal Way of Life, they would have been, I mean, they are standout songs, and they would have been great singles to promote the album.
Well, Ideal Way of Life was our choice, and the record company turned it down. And it was them that wanted to use Something's Wrong, which for me was never a single, really. No. It was a strange one. So I think, On the Run, we ended up on the B side of that, didn't we?
It did, another version, So
that was the one that was recorded for the album.
Right, okay.
Okay. I think that let's look at the difference between your live performance and your recorded output. It sort of seemed to be the strength was in live performance, and yet the recorded output always seemed to be, a different, should we say?
I don't know if it was. I mean, I think by the time the album came out, we were trying to sound more like the recorded version. We had the trumpet, Dave was playing keyboards. Right. I mean, essentially the difference was that at the point when Dave joined, he only had one keyboard. It was this crappy old Vox Continental, which sounded really weedy and thin. And we just didn't have the money to invest in the gear. So what we were playing live was what we could afford to play with, and that's what made the live sound. When we moved to the sound that became the album, I stopped playing electric guitar primarily and played 12-string acoustic. But to get an acoustic, I had to sell my Fender Telecaster to buy this crappy 12-string, which was, to this day, is like, what did I do that for? But, and then we were trying to move towards embellishing the sound so it kind of matched the sound on the album. But I think the problem with Thin Red Line is that it's pretty overproduced. and it's very hard to replicate it live without embellishing the band and having extra people. And we didn't have the investment to do that. And then I think, jumping forward, when we started playing live again, many years later, we kind of tried to return to the earlier sound because it was easier. Simple as that.
Right. What was the Undertones tour like? Because obviously from a personal level, I saw you at Hemel Hempstead Pavilion.
Yeah.
So I just wonder what that was, what that tour was like.
It was great. We'd done a small tour with Another Pretty Face and another one with the Moondogs. But this was the first time we'd played sort of big theatres. So yeah, it was exciting. The first few gigs were a bit flat. We started off in, I can't remember what the sequence was. Was it Edinburgh, Glasgow, then Newcastle, and then we kind of worked our way down. And the crowds, I think the Undertones were pretty disappointed because the crowds for them were way down on what they had been on the previous couple of tours. It started to pick up as the tour went on. And I think, it was good fun doing the tour, and we did a few really good gigs on that tour. And they were great. They were really nice people. We had a few good nights with them, and they were quite. It was quite hilarious because they had their wives with them, and their wives they were all married apart from Damien and Neil. Damien would be out sort of partying, and the rest of them were all in their beds by whenever. And but they always got the big rider before the gigs, but it was the wives that drank it all. We had a really good laugh. The show in Derby Assembly Rooms we did when we were doing, I think it was Ticking Away, Fergal Sharkey had one of the first wireless microphones. So he went off to the toilet halfway through the song and put the mic in the pan and got the engineers to feed it back through the monitors. So we could hear it, but the crowd couldn't. So we got them back by our road manager dressed up in my wife's underwear and put a headscarf on, and we got a bunch of flares, and he went on to present it to Fergal Sharkey midway through Julie Ocean. So.
That's brilliant. I love that.
As we waltzed across the back of the stage in their underpants, I think, yes.
Because you then got, I'm not sure what the timeline was, but you obviously then you supported the Stones as well. So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean that was a bit special, and it was a kind of strange one because we parted company with our original manager. Or rather, he parted company with us immediately after the Polish tour. He took the hump that we didn't invite him along on the tour because we thought, he should be staying in the UK, helping, because the album was coming out. We said, look, you need to be organising stuff for the album coming out. And so when we come back, we got all this, we got gigs, we got promo, blah, blah, blah. And he wanted to come on the trip. And when we came back from Poland, we went to get our salaries out the bank to discover there was no money left, and our manager had emptied her account basically. So things started to go pretty badly wrong from that point. And basically what happened is he didn't do it willfully in the beginning, but he got the recording contract which stated how much he was due to get his cut, but he verbally agreed that he would only take the same as we were getting on a weekly basis until we started making money. Then he would take his full share of the contract. So when he fell out, he just went to the lawyer and said, look, how much do they owe me? And the guy said, well, looking at this, you can take that much. So he took everything out. So we were kind of left high and dry, had to find a new manager. Eventually found this guy called Kellogg's, or his name was John Kalinowski. And Kellogg's at that point was manager of Madness. But he had an amazing kind of pedigree in the business. He started off as the roadie for Procol Harum when they had Whiter Shade of Pale as a hit. And he did the tour with them. He did Woodstock with them in 1969. He then toured with Joe Cocker and on the Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour in the States in the early 70s. And then he came back over here and he did one of the Stiffs tours, the second Stiff tour, whatever that one was called. And then from that he came to manage Madness. So he had loads and loads of contacts in the business, and it was through one of his contacts that he heard that the Stones were doing this big European tour, and they were doing some warm-up shows in theatres before they started doing the stadium. And so he thought he could get us the support. So he had to get a copy of the album to Mick Jagger, who was kind of vetting who he was going to be supporting, and Jagger liked it, and so that was like, way. And so we got the 3 gigs. So it was Edinburgh. So started off in Aberdeen at the Capitol Theatre, then down to Glasgow Apollo, then across to Edinburgh. And yeah, it was another kind of quite surreal experience because we were all big Stones fans, and so like the first gig in Aberdeen, we drove up and ready for our sound check, and they weren't there. They had booked Peebles Hydro, and Peebles is in the Borders, and they booked a private train to take them to the different gigs. But Peebles at that point wasn't on a railway line, so they were getting bused to Edinburgh, then put on the private train in Edinburgh, then to Aberdeen. and so they were late. So we were sitting in the theatre waiting for them to arrive to do their sound check before we could do ours. And it was fantastic because we got like this private gig. There was just like the row of about 7 of us just sitting in this theatre, and the band eventually arrived, and there's lots of kind of high fives and slapping the road crew and all this sort of stuff. And they all sort of lined up, and then Keith Richards was last. And he came on with a bottle of Jack Daniels in his hand, and he sort of swaggered onto the stage, and he was really pissed, and he was swaying around. His guitar tech came up to him with the guitar strap and just put it over his head like that. Took the bottle of Jack Daniels off him, slid his arm through, and then keeps. It's just like, whoa! It's just this. He just went from being this kind of pisshead to being a rock god. And it was astonishing to see the transformation just instantly. And also Jagger also had a radio mic, and he was checking the sound, and so he was standing at the end of our row checking his microphone out, and we're like, it's mic. So yeah, I think we were a bit starstruck the first night, and we had to change in a broom cupboard. We didn't have a dressing room. They had the whole of the backstage of the theatre, plus they had all these porta cabins out the back to extend the space. They had a crew of about 100. We had 2, and they had a restaurant. They had a gym room. They each had their own dressing room. They had a makeup room, a haircut room, all the trappings, and everywhere was draped in red silk. It was like they didn't want the Stones to see any flaking paintwork or anything like that. Red silk, fresh flowers everywhere. It was nuts. So after we played, we'd seen Jagger up in the balcony during the gig, and so there was a knock on the door, and it opened, and it was, "Hi guys, I'm Mick. Great show." And that was the extent of our meeting the Stones.
That is great, though, isn't it?
That is a great story.
Love it.
So was that, I don't want to bring us down, but was that the start of the end then?
That was very much the end, yeah. Because the whole thing, we were, I think from about Christmas 81, and then that was May 82, and basically we were on the dole the whole time because we had no money, and the record company was kind of fed up with us, and they were saying, well, we'll put in. They gave us the money for All Join Hands, but they didn't give us an advance to go with it. They wouldn't pay for any tour support, so we were kind of on our uppers a little bit. And at that point, I think coming up to the Stones shows, we thought that doing those gigs would enable us to bring other companies to come and see us and maybe get a new contract, because we got dropped by that point by Durham. It didn't happen. Nobody came along to see us. And then just prior to the Stones shows, Durham said, look, they would offer me a solo contract if I was interested. And originally I was saying no. Then it became clear there was nothing else on the table. And so we did the Stones shows, and having seen all the kind of excesses of their behaviour and the trappings that went with it, we thought, is that really where we want to be? Do we really want to be? Because they were physically fighting before the show in Glasgow. The England football team was in the audience because they were playing Scotland at Hampden the following day, and they arranged a big photo shoot. Billy Connolly was comparing in Glasgow. They arranged a photo shoot with Connolly and the England team and the Stones, and Ronnie Wood missed the shot, and so they started a fight because he wasn't in the photograph. And you think, is this it? Is this what you're aiming for? So we decided just like, let's just call it a day while we're ahead and we're still mates, So that's what we did. We finished the show in Edinburgh, went up to the dressing room, and I just said, look, I think it's time's up. We have to stop. And that's what we did. Got back in the car, drove home, burst into tears, and went to bed.
Yeah, along with all of us. Because you're all Join Hands single.
Wave to me, I move to you, but somehow I'm no nearer. It's hard to tell what might have been if we had made things clearer. Join hands.
quite a different sound to everything else that you'd done. Was that, something that you'd been working on, or did that just happen?
It kind of just happened. We over the period, I think from about summer '81, while the album was kind of about to come out, we kept getting offered different tours. We were offered a tour with the Human League at one point, and then one with Haircut 100, and none of them came off. They all got cancelled for one reason. So we were kind of kicking our heels, and publishing company were really good, and they said, look, if you want to go in the studio, if you can find a cheap studio, just go in the studio and keep writing. So that's what we did, and we spent ages up at this little studio called Palladium, where we'd recorded the first couple of singles every couple of weeks, doing maybe four or five songs every two weeks. But they were getting increasingly eclectic and increasingly diverse, and that's where that one came from. We just thought, oh, this is a potential single here. I mean, that was another funny story, because we'd done it with keyboards doing the string parts, and realised it would be better with real strings, but we didn't know anybody who plays strings. So the day before we were in the studio, my girlfriend and I were walking through London in the tube, and there was two girls busking, playing a violin and a cello. I was just going to ask them and see if they wanted to do it. And so look, this is going to sound really weird, and you probably think I'm a nutter, but would you be interested in doing a recording session tomorrow? And said, look, they'll give you a phone number, you can phone the record company and verify it's all kosher. So they did that, and then they turned up at the studio with their dads the next day just to check we were okay.
I'm going to ask a question about after TV21.
Ali and I formed a band called The Collector,
Okay.
Which was me and Ali, John Caldwell from Another Pretty Face, who played with Mike Scott, and a few other people that kind of came in and out. Neil played on what was going to be our first single. We had a deal with Stiff to record. The single was going to be Swimming, which eventually came out on Forever 22. They actually had it pressed, and then they pulled the plug at the last minute. So yeah, Ali and I played in that for about 82 to 85. Then that evolved into Shame, and I got a contract in Canada. So I moved over to Canada and did a tour over there with a sort of pickup band, which was Neil. I think John Caldwell came on that, along with Simon McGlynn, who eventually joined TV21 second time round. So yeah, we did a tour coast to coast to Canada, which was fantastic, and then got down to play in New York as well. But the album didn't really do it. It was too many stories about that one, but it just never happened.
So I'm a massive Waterboys fan. And I love that Mike Scott played the piano on Ticking Away, and obviously you played bass for the Waterboys on the Old Grey Whistle Test.
Mike was a really, and the whole of Another Pretty Face were a really big help to us when we first started, because they'd kind of moved to Edinburgh the year before us, and we relied a lot on them initially for contacts and how to go about doing stuff. I think there was always a bit of rivalry between Mike and I, and I think Mike was well pissed off that we got the Peel session before they did, and so there was all that sort of stuff going on. But so it was about maybe a year after TV21 split up, he just called me out of the blue, said would I be interested in playing a couple of tracks on the Waterboys' first album, and also on the Whistle Test. So at that time I was working in an adventure playground of all places, so I had to get the train down to London, spent a day recording a couple of tracks and they only used one of them, and then went down to London the next day and spent a day rehearsing with the band that's on the Whistle Test. So that was Mike, Carl Wallinger, the drummer was drummer from Kate Bush's band, Preston someone, and Anthony Thistlethwaite. So we just did a day rehearsing in the studio, just going over the same couple of tracks and jamming on a few things, like we were doing a version of Hungry Heart, and then did the whistle test, and then I came home.
So we got the joy of the reformed TV21, and then we get some more joy, which is Forever 22. What prompted you from the Reformation through to making the album? You know, because it's quite a gap between the two albums, isn't it? Somewhat.
23 years. We just got a real buzz out of playing again. I mean, the whole Peel thing just came about completely by accident. I'm a big Heart supporter, and had a season ticket at Tynecastle. And one day this guy tapped me on the back and started singing "Ticking Away." I'm like, what? And this guy Brian, he ran a club called the Citrus Club in Edinburgh, and he hadn't made the association. We'd been going to the games for years. One day we went for a pint after the match, and he said, "I've just been approached about doing this appeal gig with Edinburgh bands who did sessions. Would you be interested?" And I said, "No, I would. And I'll ask the guys." So we did it and thought it was great fun, and just kept going. And then from doing the gigs, built up a bunch of new songs, wanted to try and revisit some old songs. We did a little studio session in 2007, which we put out as a kind of homemade EP. I just liked the sound of it, so we thought, well, why don't we just take this further? And so my friend Ian in Canada, who had put out the Shame album, was kind of very supportive. He actually came across from Canada to see us play the Peel gig, and he said, look, if his story's quite interesting too, because he bought our first single, Playing with Fire, by post on the basis of seeing that it had been produced by Troy Tate, because he was a massive Rezillos fan and then bought everything that had any connection to the Rezillos.
Right, yeah.
So Troy Tate was part of Shake, which was the post-Rezillos split. So we were like, wow, somebody in Canada wants to buy a single. So we sent it to him. Then eventually he came across to visit his family, which was originally from Scotland, and we met him in 1983. And he said he just finished university and he was just going back to Canada. So I'm going to try and open a record store, and if that works, start a label. So if you're interested, we'll put you out. And we thought, yeah, sure, you know. And then 7 years later, he said, I've got this label, do you want to put an album out? Which is how the Shame album came out. Yeah, so he helped out, he paid for all the recording costs for Forever 22. So that's how that came about. So yeah.
So a couple of final questions. The first one is, do we have to wait another 23 years for Forever 23?
Yeah, we're working on it. I think maybe go to 25 for that one. So.
Oh, okay. I'll live with that.
I don't know, to be honest. It just kind of fizzled out. There was no argument. There was no big decision to call it a day. But after the album came out, we felt we weren't getting anywhere. We were just playing the same sort of gigs, and the crowds were dwindling again. And you think, can we keep doing this forever, just playing the same stuff? I was keen to try and keep writing new stuff. So I kept recording stuff and sending them out to everybody, but nobody was interested in doing anything. So Neil still plays. He's playing with a band called Cathode Ray. Say Ali hasn't played at all. Simon, the drummer, he plays with a very good Blondie tribute band called Dirty Harry. I play with various different people under the name of the Normans, and Simon sometimes stands in if our drummer can't make it. But yeah, there's tons of songs there. I mean, I've got about, 40, 50 songs since TV21 sitting on my computer that I don't know what to do with.
Well, I'm going to be pushing this episode like there's no tomorrow, so who knows?
But there's a tomorrow.
Exactly. We love that song. So, if I had to ask you what your greatest memory was as part of your time, what would you say it is?
I mean, one of the greatest was the first Peel session, and it was broadcast, I think, about 2 days after it was recorded, maybe a week, and we were all huddled round the radio, and he was a bit kind of non-committal for the first couple of songs, and then he did On the Run, and at the end of it he went, TV21 saving the best for last, that's terrific. And we're like, whoa, results, and we were just like leaping around the flat, and that was amazing. The gig in Warsaw at the end of the Polish tour, we did 2 shows in the Palace of Culture, which was kind of like, like the Albert Hall, this big circular venue. We did a kind of matinee show, which was okay, but then the second one, everything just came together. It was absolutely fantastic. And then the 2 gigs were the marquee gigs, the 2 Hammersmith Pally gigs with the Undertones and the Jam. They were really good. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, you just look back and you think, yeah, we didn't make it, but we had a bloody good time trying. And I'm pretty proud of what we've done. And we've all stayed friends, and I think that is a big plus as well. That we can go out and have a few beers and talk shite, and and have a laugh, and it's great. And I was out with Duffy, our former road manager, about a month ago, and we were talking about the Polish stuff, and the pair of us were just in absolute hysterics talking about it. And so when you get stuff like that, you think, yeah, it's priceless, you know. So
Well, for what it's worth, the songs were really strong. I still think there's life in TV21.
I hope so.
Okay, well, look, brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. You've been fantastic. And there's such a commonality between what we've talked about with other bands as well as yourself. So and plus the songs are so good. I want people to hear them,
Cheers. Very much.
But thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Really appreciate it.
Right.
See you
Cheers,
later.
Norman. See you. Cheers.
Undercover, so ashamed. The lies you see don't match your own. Promises made but never kept. The plans are there but the willpower's gone. In the mirror, twist and dance. Colors change in this game of chance. Right the wrongs or say you will, but not today. Tomorrow will be mine. Best laid plans of mice and men, giving way to greed again. Reflections of tomorrow's you, a misshapen image of the one you knew. Oh, such apathy, who cares anyway? Another day won't do no harm. With open eyes, you drift to sleep. Relax today, tomorrow will be fine.
Well, thank you for listening to this episode of the Uncharted 80s podcast. As you know, we do our research from a variety of sources. But of course, if you want to add any more details to what we've talked about or correct us on anything, then you can, of course, contact us. Where can they contact us, Noel?
Well, they can contact us on our email address, which is podcast@uncharted80s.com.
Brilliant. Or you can do that via our Facebook group, The Uncharted 80s. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.